So welcome everyone for this morning's panel session, an investment outlook on the cell and gene therapy space. And one of the things that we wanted to do was bring together investors from a little bit different walks of life to try to provide a perspective of how they're viewing the space and what are the types of companies they invest in and what's the decision tree that they typically go through in an effort really to help the audience understand what sort of investors they might want to focus on, and hopefully educate the audience on what kind of things the investors are looking for so that they can tailor their pitches appropriately. And so without further ado, I mean, you guys may know me. I'm Ren Benjamin. I'm a senior analyst at Raymond James. Several of my colleagues are in the audience, Steve Seedhouse and Dane Leone as well. We're a mid-tier investment bank focused in this space. And instead of me butchering the names and coming up with the wrong facts for the various funds, I'd love for the panelists to each introduce themselves to you in about 2 to 3 minutes, and their funds. A little bit about maybe how big, your investment horizons, and the like before we jump right into it. So Elona, you have the floor.
Okay, hopefully you can all hear me. If not, just raise your hand. Elona Baum, so you don't butcher it. We've tried a couple times. I am actually probably maybe one of the only lawyers that is on the panel, so forgive me for that. I was originally with Genentech for many years, and then I was head of legal and business development at the California Institute for Regenerative Medicine, whereupon I saw about $2 billion worth of regen med projects become approved or not. Then I ended up going over to DEFTA Partners. DEFTA Partners is about 2 decades old. It was founded by a man named George Hara, who is currently an aide to in Japan and at the highest levels. When I was at CIRM, he came to me and said, Elona, I think we need to change the regulatory paradigm, and we need to just not spend so much time on safety and just get it into patients. And I said, I think you're crazy, but yes, I'll help you put together some key thought leaders and we'll discuss it. Well, lo and behold, now you all know there is a truncated pathway in Japan. So I think that's the power of what DEFTA can do, is we have contacts very deep in Japan. We're the bridge to Japan. That's why we're invited to join a lot of syndicates. We're very early stage. To be frank with you, our fund is about 60, 70 million. We're still raising. That's why there's no definitive answer. We're early stage, as I just mentioned, and our checks are smaller, but because we have this influence, we are in a number of deals. We are looking in 3 general areas, of course, advanced therapeutics, but because of our history, we also are in digital health, which I won't talk about, and enabling technologies, which is, you know it when you see it, but an example would be Taro Biosciences, which is basically hearts on a chip. So happy to answer any other questions later.
Dennis?
Yeah, my name's Dennis Purcell. I started in the life sciences industry at a firm called Payne Weber, which was acquired by UBS. And I was thinking about Genentech. What we did at Payne Weber was we did some innovative financings that used to be called off-balance sheet financings, research and development limited partnerships, where you took and actually just financed the molecule. So at Genentech, there were things like human growth hormone and the like. At Amgen, it was things like Epogen and Neupogen. Genzyme, we did a bunch of them. I then went to a firm called Hambrecht & Quist, and in the late 80s, early 90s, there were 4 firms, for those of you that are my age or older, Robertson Stevens, Alex Brown, Montgomery Securities, and firms like ours, the 4 of us, generally financed most of the industry early on. They were tech and life sciences firms. So we kind of did Apple and Genentech going public and things like that, all acquired by larger firms. And that's why now, for those of you in January that go out to San Francisco, it's called the JP Morgan Conference. We were acquired by JP Morgan. I then started a venture firm, called Aisling Capital. And at the time, identified a lack of financing for what was then called, and now called also, as the Valley of Death. So we went later stage rather than earlier stage. We felt that, or I felt that there was a lot of financing for early stage companies then back in the early 2000s, and there was somewhat of a dearth of financing for later stage companies. That's kind of been filled in now. We've raised about $2 billion over time. Our philosophy now is a little bit more flexible, and I've become now senior advisor to the firm. We're out raising our 5th fund right now. Thanks.
Patrick?
I'm Patrick Rivers. I'm an investor with a biotech dedicated investment fund in San Francisco called Aquilo Capital. We invest exclusively in R&D stage human therapeutics companies. We manage about $250 million today. Very concentrated portfolio, generally about 15 positions is what we want to handle. And we really focus on novel technologies, platform-based companies that have broader pipelines where we think that there is a real foundation for creating value over a long period of time by monetizing additional assets that come from a platform. And so there's a phenotype of company that makes a lot of sense for us. And our investment horizon generally is 3 to 5 years or longer. So we're really looking for opportunities where the value of the company is going to be unlocked over a longer period of time, and the market really isn't ascribing fundamental value to that. We're agnostic to disease area. We are agnostic to treatment modality. We have invested quite a bit in cell and gene therapies over the last several years, as I think that those companies have matured to a place where we're seeing the technology really emerge as being clinically relevant in a lot of different disease areas where maybe it wasn't 5 or 10 years ago, and I think that's going to continue to occur. My background is protein engineering. I worked in drug development for about 10 years for discovery stage development for novel biologic structures like ADCs and bispecific antibodies.
It's all you, Matt.
Great. So I'm Matthew Gline. I'm the CFO of Roivant. We are unique on the panel in that we are not actually an investment fund. We're a company. We are sort of building an alternative model for what we think a large pharma company should look like, but borrowing from the language and the constructs of the investment industry. So we build from scratch and manage a portfolio of therapeutics companies. We have about 15 of them now, where our goal is to run them as independent companies, but own a majority of them as they grow and develop. They're all largely development stage therapeutics companies today. Ultimately, we will commercialize the products as part of the company, but we don't have a fund life or a fund horizon. We've raised about $3 billion in capital in aggregate around the platform to build these companies and mature them and seek to develop into a commercial biopharma company of our own.
So let's jump right into it, right? One of the first things that you guys have to do is make a decision on whether or not to invest, right? And everyone has a different decision tree, and some of it is based on kind of their experience in the field. Others is just areas that they like to focus on or platforms. Can you go through a little bit of what your decision tree is? What are the boxes that you have to have checked when you are thinking about an investment? What are the ones that you have a little bit of wiggle room on? And maybe provide an example from your portfolio of what fits.
Me first?
Go for it.
All right. I'm probably a little more intuitive maybe than some of my other panelists, but it's the same thing you'll probably hear time and time again. You look at the technology, you look at the team. For me, the technology has to be a game changer, and I know it sounds trite because everybody says that. You want something that's really going to make a difference, but we really do. I mean, that's why we say we're in the bucket of advanced therapeutics, because we're looking to be in unmet medical needs. You know it when you see it. I'll give you a couple examples. I think that really sheds a lot more light on it. So we actually launched Endogena, which is ex-Roche, somebody I knew through CERM, and he's doing endogenous regeneration using small molecules. So what we're really trying to do is find ways to sort of circumvent some of the hurdles that we currently see in cell and gene therapy. So small molecule to do RegenMed sounded like it made a lot of sense. We have a pending deal with BioEclipse.
It's me, sorry.
Oh, sorry. And that's basically a CIK with a virus. So again, that eliminates some other issues. So that's, and then ImmuSoft, which is here, and we've invested in them. So you get a sense of what we're sort of looking for in terms of technology, but the team is really important. I used to think it's not as important, but I think we need a really mature team that can show that they can raise money. And does that mean that they have to have done it before? Not necessarily. I mean, if they could show me that, you know, they've got a deal and it'll get them to an inflection point, we'll look at that, but I really want to see a really good team. And to tell you the truth, what we do behind the scenes is we call our other buddies at the larger VCs and say, what do you think? Would you invest in this, generally speaking? And we try to get a read on that. Oh, and the reason I brought this up here is because I wanted to say something about women, being that I'm the only woman on the panel. And I didn't want to say that we look only for female CEOs, because we don't. There's no quotas here, but I got to say, there happens to be a number of female CEOs in our portfolio, and I'm very proud of that. And I think they, and I don't want to overgeneralize, but I'm really happy with what I'm seeing from female CEOs, and I do think that sometimes they have a harder time raising funds, but I'll tell you, they tell a straight story from what I've seen. I think we'll see more and more of them. So I wanted to mention that as well. There's a lot of other things that go into it. It's a whole gestalt, but I'll let my other panelists say their piece.
How about you, Dennis? You've been in the industry long enough. You've seen what works, what doesn't work. How are you looking at it?
Yeah, that's a great shout out to women CEOs. I think each company is different, each situation's different, but kind of there are some common themes. I mean, you really want to see a company that comes in that doesn't hype, and they're somewhat realistic, and that understands the competitive environment. We see a lot of stuff. So if somebody comes in, and I remember one company came in, it was a pain company, and talk about the competitive environment, and they mentioned a couple of companies, and a week later, another pain company came in from Australia, was doing the exact same thing. They didn't mention them. And you have to question yourself, do they really understand what's going on competitively? You're also looking for people particularly your management teams that know how to pivot, because there is no straight line. And if you look at the history of a lot of these companies, they're big pivots. And I've started to go back and look at the history of products, and there are some strange ways that products have gotten to market. And we have to look at financings. I mean, one of the issues that we have now are kind of financings to nowhere. And we have to really understand that we're not going to be left holding the bag, where all of a sudden there's some progress being shown or whatever. The company needs another $100 million or $50 million or $25 million. We have to have some sense of where it's coming from. As a fund, we have to get money out, and we have to raise money and get the money back to limited. So we don't really have the luxury of a 15 or 20 year time frame. And in this space, we went at it a little bit differently. We went at it most recently in the precision medicine space. I hired a guy about 6 or 7 years ago from the FDA who had been a reviewer and was really a quality guy. And he was one of those, and we hired him, he was an oncologist, and he was one of those people that in partners meetings I paid attention to. He really got it. And he came into my office a few years ago and said, I've been watching these companies, and obviously I don't know everything, but I've seen enough companies fail, and I've seen enough companies succeed that I have a general idea of what works and what doesn't work, and I have this compound that I like, and I'd like to start a company around it. Is that okay with you? And I said, absolutely, we'll fund it. I'll give you the money to get it going. The guy's name was Josh Belinker, and Josh started the company called Loxo. So we funded it, and it was the first drug that got approved that was tumor agnostic for track inhibitor. And Josh really knew how to pivot and the like. He had a backup plan, a RET inhibitor that was number 2. We knew we had our hands around what the financing was going to be. He never hyped it. He was shot at a lot of times from some competitors, and he never shot back. Just kind of kept his head down and did what he said he was going to do. And ultimately it paid. And we were going to try to build a big company. And that was the game plan, and hang with it for a couple of years because we think we have another approval coming pretty soon. But ultimately, Lilly came in and made an offer that was very tough to refuse, and we sold the company to Lilly. He was able to pivot and kind of put his personal ambitions aside and did the right thing for shareholders. So that was one that was kind of a textbook case for us, at least, in how a biotech company should work.
Patrick, you see your share of public and private companies, maybe more from a public side. What are your boxes?
Yeah, I mean, we actually have a very clear framework for the type of company that makes sense for us to invest in. And I, the preamble, alluded to focusing on platform companies. So that's box number 1, which is, do you have a platform technology that is differentiated in some way in terms of creating novel biological structures, or maybe it's just a really deep domain expertise in a certain area of biology. But it has to create repeatable assets. And it can be against different disease targets and different disease areas. The more breadth that it has, I think, the better for us. We also really like companies that already have partnerships with large pharma or bigger biotech companies. That's a really important criteria for us. There are a lot of tangible benefits that come from those types of business development transactions. It's not just the cash that you might bring up front, but there's validation for the platform technology that comes along with that. And there's the ability to create value with spending other people's dollars, which is great. And so we really want those partnerships to be in place before we make an investment, which is different than some of our peers for sure, who want you to just hold all the value as long as you can and monetize it later. So those are 2 really important boxes for us. The other is that we want to invest in companies that are already well-financed. So that's a little odd because you're coming to us for money in general, but we prefer companies who are raising money because they can and not because they have to, and are taking advantage of circumstances to, with less dilution, provide themselves with a longer cash runway. If you don't have at least 2 or 3 years of cash, then it's a tougher hill for us to get over. So those are real important criteria for us in general. There are a lot of other nice to have but harder to quantify elements, which really are digging into the scientific nuance of the technology and the drugs themselves. And we spend probably 3 to 6 months doing scientific diligence around the quality of the data and the biological impact of the programs that you're developing and how relevant that is for the disease areas that you're trying to tackle. And we have to come to a view that those things are not being properly priced. At our hearts, we're value investors, which is you have to have created some value that the market isn't appreciating, whether that's a private valuation or a public valuation. And I think another easy way to articulate it is what we don't do, which is make bets on binary events. We like companies to have breadth, and we don't want the value of an investment to hinge on the outcome of one clinical trial. That's something that we really actively try to avoid. So I think that gives a pretty good flavor of how we spend our time.
And Matt?
So we're playing a little bit of a different sport than the other folks on the panel in the sense that we are creating companies from scratch generally, which means we don't, for example, occasionally a team comes with an asset, but generally we don't get to look a team in the face in addition to the thing that we're investing in. We have to figure out how we're going to pull one together. That also gives us the privilege of designing the company the way that we want it to. And so I would say we also would call ourselves value investors, but I think what we mean by that is really 2 things. One is we like investing in areas where there seems to be a gap between the size of the opportunity and the amount of other dollars pouring in. So we like We like targets, we like strategies, we like mechanisms, whatever it is, where there's not a lot of other people playing. There can be one or two, and I think part of that's because the other thing we really like is we like some kind of validation. We like some clinical data. We like something we can sink our teeth into that is more than a scientific story, whether it's another drug of a similar target that has done something, or whether it's a predecessor version of this drug that has done something. We like something where we can sink our teeth into some data and understand that we're gonna get somewhere. And then I think the question for us is, can we make a difference? So is there something we're going to be able to do by building the company, whether it's through capital, or whether it's by bringing an interesting team, or whether it's by combining the asset with something we have elsewhere in the family, or whether it's through development expertise that we've already built up in a therapeutic area or something like that, where we feel like we can step in and build a company that's going to have a differential path forward. And so just like an example from one of our gene therapy companies, for example, so we have Axivant, which I think spoke earlier this morning actually here, which is a gene therapy company focused on neurological disorders. So that started, as many people will know, with the long history with a company focused on developing small molecules for dementia and neurodegenerative disease. Obviously, we had a significant failure in Alzheimer's disease, a popular topic today. But we had this team that we thought was actually pretty good at running dementia trials and looking at neurodegenerative disease. And then we saw an opportunity in Parkinson's gene therapy, and so we pivoted the company and used the development expertise where we thought we could make a difference to bring now that lead candidate through some data and beyond. So that's really sort of how we think about that.
So you brought up a bunch of different interesting characteristics that I think we can flush out, but maybe separately. I guess thinking about investors right now, there seems to be a growing sense that the space, the cell and gene therapy space, might actually be getting too crowded. Just when we're kind of hitting that cusp of, the financings are up and the like, we're starting to hear rumblings of indication crowding and things along those lines. Is that something that you're actually concerned about? And if indication crowding isn't necessarily one of them, what are you starting to become concerned about? Maybe we'll start with Patrick and come back this way and end with Maddie.
Yeah, I think it's not unique to cell and gene therapy, but I think more a characteristic of going after orphan diseases, which is these are not inherently large markets and there's not a lot of patients. And so I think this is an area where being first to market matters a lot more than being best in class. To an extent that may not be true with other larger disease indications. So unless you have a dramatically different differentiating characteristic for your treatment, being the first approved gene therapy for hemophilia, for example, is going to be a big deal because you're going to have an opportunity to early on capture a lot of the patients who are ready to engage with that therapy. The thing I guess I'm worried about isn't really crowding in indications. It's that there might be too much value ascribed to really small numbers of patients. And I think we see a lot of times in this area now where you have 2 or 3 or 4 patients worth of data that looks like it might be biologically interesting, and far too much value is ascribed to that as a consequence of extrapolating what that might actually look like in 20 or 50 or 100 patients.
Dennis?
Me? Yeah, I'm probably a little bit different than you, Patrick, on this one. I mean, Janet mentioned this morning, 1,000 trials. Some of them are combination. The majority of them are oncology. They're not all going to win. I was involved in a situation that I just can't get out of my head, which is not related to gene therapy, but related to one of the last classes of drugs that was supposed to be a blockbuster, the PCSK9s in the cardiovascular space. And that was going to be like the next great thing, just like gene therapy is going to be the next great thing. And the CEO of Sanofi said best blockbusters in his career, and it was going to be a big deal. Wall Street was saying $1 billion right out of the box. And I'm at this board meeting. A guy to my left, where Patrick was the chief medical officer of Harvard Pilgrim. And I'm reading all this stuff in Wall Street saying they're going to pay 14 grand for it, 14 grand. I understand gene therapy is, 200 grand and 400 grand and 4 million. And I said, what do you think about this, PCSK9s? I said, are you going to pay 14 grand for all this stuff? And he said, no, of course not. We're only paying 3 grand for it. I could play these guys off against each other. I said, no, you got to pay 14 grand for it. That's what Wall Street's saying. I said, no, we're paying 3 grand for it. And all of a sudden I thought to myself, and this might go at the value per patient question, I thought, wow, we don't even have any idea what we're talking about. People that are actually paying for these drugs are going to play everybody off against each other, and they have all the cards. And consequently, it became a big flop in terms of commercialization, and now we're going to reintroduce it at 4 grand or something like that. So I don't know, 1,000 trials, combination trials, mostly cancer, maybe orphan with a small group of people. I think there's an issue with crowding.
Elona?
Oh, good. I love the contrarian approach or viewpoint. So as a whole, I don't think the sector is overcrowded and okay, that's it, let's pack up our bags. I think it's only just beginning. So I'm very bullish on the sector as a whole. That said, there's no way we'll do another cancer deal. I should never say no way because I'll probably shoot myself in the foot. But I run usually when someone says no, cancer. And when I take my meetings, I try to look and I try to avoid cancer. I think, we're looking at neuro, which is, we're on the early stage. But I try to go where everybody else isn't going. And so we're not going to do any more cancer. We've done one IO and that's it. So I'm pretty bullish. I think there's a lot more to get proved out, and this technology is going to be solving unmet medical needs, and I guess maybe that's my background, having been at CERM, but I remain very bullish, and I see what's in the pipeline, and I'm very excited. That's all I think I could add to this.
This is the challenge for me, and I hear what you're saying. With all the IO companies out there, to pick one and run with it.
It was really hard.
You got to be pretty confident in yourself. And so what I'm thinking about is, can we develop new financial instrument? Like, look at all the companies here today. Can any of us really pick the winner 5 years from now? Can any of us really pick the next $10 billion company? Is there a way to invest in the sector that's different than the way we invest now? Our only opportunity today as investors is to look at the list today and pick one or pick 2. Maybe if you have the nerve, you pick 5. But you're picking 5 out of 40 that are investing today, or 50, whatever are investing. Is there a different way that we should be thinking about financing the sector, investing in the sector, or whatever, other than simply having to make that long-term bet that I picked the right IO company?
I guess I do see a distinction between gene therapy as a technology and like PD-1 as a target, right? Where you get 70 companies targeting PD-1 or whatever, and that's like one thing. I mean, gene therapy.
But by the way, then you got to pick the right PD-1 company
absolutely,
too. PD-1s are going to work, but you want to pick the right one? How do you pick the right one?
Yes, so
we don't
have an IO Vant. Is the short answer to that question. Not yet. But I do think in gene therapy, so certainly, I mean, I agree. Like if you're talking about orphan monogenic indications, it's hard to think you want to get into a 6-part war against a single orphan monogenic indication. But I do think, why are gene therapy companies historically thought of as going after orphan monogenic indications? Well, they're cheap to develop. If you're the first to market, you can get a lot of value delivered quickly. And so you figure like the earliest innovative companies in gene therapy, of course, this is kind of what they're going to look like. And I think we're at kind of a funny moment right now where, okay, now there's maybe an overabundance of those companies, but gene therapy as a technology should work for lots of things. It should work for diseases that are not orphan monogenic indications. I mean, I'm talking in my book a little bit. We have a Parkinson's drug. We have a gene therapy. It's a strange program. We have a gene therapy at one of our Vants for overactive bladder, which is definitely not an orphan monogenic indication. And actually, we got pilloried in the press for it. Somebody wrote this article, and they were like, this technology is too important to be used for overactive bladder. And I'm just thinking to myself, like, can you imagine someone writing an article saying, like, a monoclonal antibody or a small molecule chemistry program is too important to be used for a headache? Like, I just think, like, it's a it's an interesting, so I think we're going to see a transition to more and more companies thinking about ways to use the same technology in bigger diseases, and especially now that you have large pharma companies have platforms in gene therapy, can run big trials, can manage large commercial programs, can manage, some of the things that I think will be truly challenging about these technologies from a scale perspective. But you've got companies with huge deep pockets able to run large centers and do interesting things. So I think what we will see is, if there's crowding right now in monogenic orphan indications where it's like quote unquote easy at this point to start a company, starting no company is ever easy, but easier to start a company going after those things because it's a proven pathway, it's an understood pathway, like people know what that looks like. As we get better tooling, as you get, I think about the mRNA space or the RNAi space, where now you've got TriLink, which is it's a lab provider, but you can go and you can buy pretty good off-the-shelf mRNA, and that has completely opened up the field of what people can do if you just want to start an mRNA company without an academic center. I think about what that's going to look like in gene therapy once many people can start gene therapy companies because the tools are there and you can do it in a garage laboratory. And I think you'll just start seeing people going after more indications. So I think to me the question about the sector, and I think that worry is not the right word, but I think that I think about is like, there is some chance that gene therapy is the next monoclonal antibody, and that there's thousands of gene therapy programs approved, and many, many millions of patients have taken a gene therapy in their lifetime. Or there's a chance that it's a niche modality that is best for monogenic orphan indications, and I think we will need much more clinical data and many more companies to go through this process to see which way we're headed. Obviously, we've made a bet on what we think, but I think that to me is the question that's going to present itself over the next handful of years as more and more of these companies actually achieve some clinical validation, and we start seeing more approved therapies, more therapies that have been in more patients, more therapies where there's some real world data around them, where we can start wrapping our heads around what this actually looks like as a modality.
So is safety, is safety the primary risk now in this field in cell and gene therapy? Have most investors kind of gotten past the, hey, we can express this where we want to express it, we can get levels where we need to get it to, and definitely cure monogenic diseases? Have we kind of gone past that, and now most people are focused on safety, commercialization risks? And I guess part of the reason why I'm asking this is, there are the standard things that we all talk about and we wrestle with, pricing and is that market there? Is there something that the panel knows that you're starting to think about that most of us might not have heard?
Safety is definitely not my primary concern. I think the universe is littered with the carcass of plenty of safe drugs that just don't do anything. I think that's the bigger problem. In this space, though, what's a little bit different for us in how we go about our processes for selecting investments is that manufacturing is the most important variable. And to a much greater extent than with generally any other type of company, like the first thing that we're going to interrogate is, what is your manufacturing setup? How scalable is it? What can you do yourself? What do you have to outsource? What are you doing in process development today versus what you need to accomplish tomorrow? And how is that vision to commercial scale going to materialize? So manufacturing becomes question number 1, 2, and 3 when getting to know a gene therapy company for the first time.
Patrick, clinical trials are pretty transparent. We did these 20 patients and these were the results. When you get into doing that due diligence in manufacturing, it's kind of like below the surface a little bit. How comfortable are you when you do that due diligence, or how well do you think you do that due diligence?
It's hard.
Yeah, that's what
It's a pretty opaque area, and very few companies are really willing to talk about manufacturing at a granular level because there's a lot of secret sauce that's attached to it, and they don't really want to talk about it. So I find myself asking the same question over and over and over again to try and glean a small amount of information.
I do think you want to start a gene therapy company today. I think there's a huge opportunity for like the Elona of gene therapy, right? Like the services company where we don't have to worry about the manufacturing piece anymore because there's someone out there, Samsung, I don't know, someone out there who can be relied on as a proper scale, reasonably low cost contract manufacturer of gene therapies where they can do the sort of manufacturing piece of it. And I think if we believed as company builders, as investors, that there was a place out there where, again, a couple people with an interesting idea or an academic center that has a cool program, that we thought there was any real path for them to be able to scale that using a third party, or frankly, I think this is one of the reasons valuations are going up in the space, because we believe that large pharma can come in and scale that up at the right moment. I think that will change what it feels like to invest in these companies, because right now I agree. Like right now you're stuck diligencing both the program and the team, and also like, can they get this thing to a phase of development that only, 2, 3, 4 gene therapies have ever made it to, and so there's just a lot of work to do to figure out whether that's possible.
So I'll push back on that
Just
one.
a quick one. Matt, do you know anybody who's kind of thinking that way or trying to do that? Become the Illumina of...
We're looking, I don't.
No, you don't.
No, I don't.
No
So-
one wants to invest in that.
So I'll push back on it a little bit, only because we talk with a lot of companies who are focused on their own manufacturing, and that's because they've tried it, going to a contract manufacturer, and they don't seem to get it exactly right, and they don't care enough. So they say it's got to come back in-house. And so we actually talk to a lot of investors who say, look, I want them to be doing it themselves. But so you're saying that that's not necessarily a
No, I also want it to be done well. I want it to be done in a reliable way. I want to produce good chemistry. But I think that's the problem is not that there aren't people who say they can do it. The problem is it's early enough that there aren't people who can actually do it. And I think about mRNA, and I think about look, there's clearly, you think about mRNA manufacturing platforms, like there's a couple companies that have world-class mRNA manufacturing platforms, and currently they command a significant portion of the valuation in the mRNA landscape with those platforms. But so we have a company that's in oligonucleotide therapeutics, and I'll tell you, we buy off-the-shelf mRNAs and RNAis from TriLink, which is a GTCR portfolio company, and I'll tell you, they have gotten just way better. And so I do think at some point we will cross this. I agree we're not there now, but I think at some point we ought to cross this threshold line. And it could be a couple different things, right? It could be that there is a good service provider. I don't know what service provider means. There's some good service provider who can do some of these things, and that makes it easier. Or it honestly could just be that we get to a point where enough of from an investor perspective, and this is really not as relevant to us because we're not so much looking for the exit, but I think when enough of the large pharma companies actually have real gene therapy platforms, I think you're going to start seeing a lot more gene therapy companies that are valued for their programs more than their platforms, because there are buyers who have the platforms. There are buyers who can do the scale up, and so you're looking for people to take risk on the target and take risk on the biology, and then they can hand it off down the line.
So I hate to ask the question, but I will, only because I feel that at cell and gene therapy right now, we're kind of at that next generation, but people are already looking at what is the new next generation things to invest in. And off the bat, I kind of think of gene editing, right? And gene editing of cell therapies as being the next generation, allogeneic cells, right? And the whole platform of iPSCs. But what are you guys looking at, right now that you think has a potential future? I'll start with you, Elona.
Well, I think I already mentioned it a couple times earlier about our portfolio, because that's what we sort of do, is we're trying to look way in the future. So I hate to say it, but we were looking at a small molecule to induce endogenous regenerative impact. This is someone who came from Roche who had some insights, I should say. So we were pretty confident that he could actually end up pretty successful. It's very early stage, and Pete Coffey, who is somebody that CIRM really thought very highly of, is running things and is, I don't want to overstate it, but very happy, let's just say, with what they see. So we are looking at that next gen. That's where we go, is we go to the next gen. So I was at Genentech, when there were shortages, and then there was oversupply, and I think that there was a chart I saw from Lonza that actually showed that in the future they're going to be able to reduce the cost of gene therapy significantly, and what they didn't talk about but was on display was an oversupply. I was like, oh yeah, it's going to be just like the antibody days at some point in time. So we'll get there. To me, it's no question, but I still would rather go where the COGS are lower now and closer in. So that's why we're going with with a small molecule approach. But we're also doing with from borrowing the armed antibody days, we're sort of now going with a virus in a CIK. That just makes sense. It's the next generation. It has allo capabilities, and again, for COGS, I'd rather be an allo. So we're running out of time. I could keep going forever on that.
So Dennis, what about you? Next, is it worth even thinking about?
I think I'm the wrong guy to ask. I'm just trying to make it to the end of the week.
I'll switch to Patrick.
I'll do it.
Punt
I'll
to
do
Patrick.
it. I'll give a cell therapy example and a gene therapy example because I'm that guy. On the gene therapy side, I'm really excited about the potential for intravitreal delivery of viral vectors that can get to the back of the eye. I think subretinal delivery is fraught with a number of challenges, technically or commercially, and I would love somebody to crack that problem of being able to deliver AAV to the back of the eye with an intravitreal injection. So that's a technology that I'm excited about. On the cell therapy side, I'd really like to get more involved in cell therapy and autoimmune disease. I think we've seen a lot in oncology, and there's a lot to be excited about there. And we have data, a lot in liquid tumors that looks fantastic, and not so much in solid tumors. I think we'll get there. But I think that there's just a ton of open landscape for developing cell therapy in autoimmune disease, and we haven't seen much of it yet.
Matt, next generation Vant?
I'm probably in a similar category to Dennis, only in the sense that we're mostly a clinical development focused company, so most of our programs are in the clinic. And I think we have the benefit, therefore, of investing in things after we've seen some clinical data, after we've seen the sort of impact on patients, which is, I think, a privilege. And it puts us in a different part of the investment curve than some other people. That's I think what I alluded to earlier. I think we are excited to see, with the existing technology, which I think, we're excited to see people go broader on the kinds of things that they want to use gene therapy for. I agree on autoimmune disease and cell therapy, like the kinds of things that people want to use cell therapy for. I mean, I think once you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. I mean, I think a lot of people have looked at these technologies and they've seen a couple of hammers out there, and they've built like an entire board full of nails. And I think that's interesting to see what else we can do with these tools that already exist. And so I'd like to see broader indications for cell and gene therapy. I'd like to see, the cost of using, back in my part, I'd like to see the cost of using these technologies, not even from obviously I'd like to see the cost of using these technologies from a patient and healthcare system perspective go down. But even before that, I'd like to see the cost of developing these technologies go down. I'd like to see it get easier for people to build companies around cell therapies, for people to build companies around gene therapies, because I think these should be big things. Gene editing is also clearly in the same category of waiting for its nail, and someday it'll find it. So that's something to watch.
In the 2 minutes we have left, let me ask the investment outlook question, and end with that, right? And Matt, we'll start with you, and come back this way. What is, from an investment outlook perspective, 2019, 2020, what is your perspective? This is a great time to be investing. You're a little bit different than the rest of the funds. The funds have to manage every 6 months, a year, 3 years. They have to manage a return, and they may have to look at times to get in, times to get out. From your perspective, how are you looking at the investment landscape?
Yeah, look, it's always a great time to deliver positive late-stage clinical data. There's never a bad time to deliver late-stage positive clinical data. We have 7 phase 3 trials reading out across our family of companies over the next 12 to 18 months. We had one this past week. I think for me, the thing that we are focused on is advancing programs through the clinic and delivering good data. We have, again, the luxury of some amount of time that others don't have, in the sense that we don't have the sort of fund life exit dynamic that we need to play into, which is a great privilege that our sort of long-term permanent capital holders have given us. But I think for us, it's all about delivering data.
So then let's talk about fund life and performance. What do you think about 2019 going into 2020, Patrick, for whether it's time, stay by the sidelines? I'm
really excited. I think I see a lot of opportunities to put money to work. We're actively trying to raise more money, and I'm trying to spend it. I think we have the luxury of, we only invest in biotech companies, right? So I'm not paid to opine on macroeconomics. I'm paid to find investments in great biotech companies. And I'm going to keep doing that, and I'm going to do it with zest, because I think we're at a very unique place in time where science is amazing. We're learning so much about how to tackle these diseases that we couldn't do 5 or 10 years ago. And pharma has just monumental quantities of cash to pour into innovative young companies. And I want to be part of that.
So I'm over time, so I'll let Dennis and Elona maybe share a couple of quick thoughts on what you think the outlook is.
Sometimes we raise money when we're overvalued. Sometimes we raise money when we're undervalued. I don't know about the outlook, but raise the money when we can.
And I guess we're investing. We're very bullish on the whole sector, as I indicated earlier, and I think it's going to be a great year.
So one of the things that we highlighted was just the way the fourth quarter turned out. It was actually disastrous in our space, in the small mid-cap space. And so while we are hopeful, we had run into a lot of investors who felt like they wanted to be a little bit more cautious this year. The market is now again, ripping, and so, it does seem like that tide is changing. Obviously, when the fund's performance does well, they have more capital to deploy, and so we're hearing the same thing, that this is, again, turning around to be a good year. With that, thank you very much, and please thank the panelists for their time.